If you want to learn the feather stitch and see some ways that you might be able to use it in your work, then you're in the right place. The feather stitch is one of my all-time favorite stitches, and it is very versatile for anyone who likes to stitch landscapes or anyone who wants to do freehand embroidery. I'm Julie, and I like to make fabric landscapes using quilting techniques as well as some embroidery. So when I put together the landscapes that I make, I have layers of fabric and I hand stitch it all together. And then at the end of the process, I generally add hand stitching to create all of the details that I want to see. So I will embroider in trees and flowers, maybe some bushes or a fence, whatever it is in the landscape that I want to add that is easier added with embroidery rather than with pieces of fabric. So I'm going to show you how I love to use the feather stitch, and hopefully it will give you some ideas of how you can use it in your own work. Let's get started. Okay, so to show you the feather stitch, I thought it would be fun. I'm using a piece of my painted sky fabric, and then I sponge painted on some more green at the bottom, and it's really just to fill in some color here. Now this piece of fabric is just a lightweight cotton, so I fused some woven interfacing to the back of it. And I do that because I stitch without a hoop. I don't use a hoop because with my landscapes, I run the risk of damaging some of the layers of fabric when I am doing my embroidery. So what I do is I just stitch freehand. So all of my demonstrations are without a hoop. So I'm going to use some embroidery floss. And embroidery floss has 6 strands. So for this demonstration, like I think I'm going to use 2 strands. I will often just stitch with one. I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to take 2. So the way that you remove 2 strands out of a 6-strand thread, you just grab the 2 and then gently hold this and pull it through. And sometimes you have to kind of um, sort of move it down a little bit, but that removes it. And then this will not actually be tangled. See? So now we've got those 4 strands I can use later. But this 2 strands is what I like to work with a lot of the time. So let me just see. I'm going to grab a needle. This is probably a size 7. See if I can thread that. Nothing like trying to thread a needle on camera. Oh my God. Okay. Ah, now I only got one. Jeez Louise. Hey, last try. Oh, come on, girl. You got this. Do I got this? I did it. Okay. Phew. Okay. So there's 2 strands. Now I'm going to tie a knot in the end of my thread, and I do it the same way all the time. I hold the end against my needle, wrap twice, grab that wrap, and then pull it through, and you end up with a nice knot on the end of your thread. Some people prefer not to use knots when they're doing embroidery, but because I am working generally on landscapes, I knot everything. So basically, the way that a feather stitch works, you want to work it top to bottom and in a row. So especially if you're working on landscape. So I'm going to, just for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to draw in a line of where I want. I'm doing it like a plant. Most of the time I use a feather stitch in a plant. So I'm drawing in a line as a guide for where that plant is going to go. And just in case you've never seen these before, this is called a Frixion pen, and it is a heat erasable pen. So if I don't cover over this line, I'm just going to quickly touch it with an iron, and that will get rid of that color. But honestly, when I'm working on my landscapes, I don't draw in any sort of guidance lines. I just freehand it, but this is for the demonstration. It might make it easier to see. So I'm going to come up at the top of the line. I'm going to control the thread with my thumb just to keep it down low. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over from where I came up and put my needle in and out. And where it comes out is going to be the bottom of that stitch. So watch. So as I'm pulling it, that thread is looped behind my thread. Now here's a tip. If you do this and your thread looks like this after, when you pull down, that is not correct. And that's happening because you're pulling up with the thread instead of down. So what you want to do is just take the dull end of your needle and just pull that out loose again. And when you pull the thread tight, pull down the fabric. So pull that way, and then that way you'll get a nice crisp V. So then I'm going to hold my thread down, holding it with my thumb, and I'm going to bring my needle just to the left of that line, and I'm going to go in the fabric and come back out right at the line. And you see that distance is going to be where the next V is. And because I'm holding this thread down, that is going to catch as I'm pulling and create the next V. So it's really just a continuous interlocking bunch of stitches. So with this next one, I'm going to come over from where I came up and then bring my needle out along the line again. Okay? And then I'm going to pull, making sure I'm holding this thread so I know it's going to be underneath, and that's going to hook my thread again. Okay, and I'm going to do it again, going over to the side and come up along the stem. Okay, I'm going to go to the other side. Now I'm making this look like a very even plant. You know, the left to right to left to right. It's all very even. But here's the thing with a feather stitch. It doesn't have to be even everywhere. In fact, you could do 2 stitches on the same side, right? I could do 2 stitches on this side. As long as you're always interlocking at the bottom, your stitches are going to keep moving. They're going to keep on building on that plant. Okay, and then to finish that off, because you have to tack down that stitch, you have to put your needle in and go to the back of the fabric. So if that was all you wanted, you could just tie your thread off, but I still have a bit of thread here. So what I generally will do is, especially if it's something like a plant that I'm sort of free hand drawing, I will bring my needle back up somewhere along that stem. I'm going to come up like right here. How about? And then you can take a few separate stitches. You can just do a straight stitch and basically work your way back up the plant, adding in a few extra branches. And that's just using straight stitches. So just coming up and going down. And it's just a good way to use up your thread. I'm going to make this one a little bit more interesting by, I'm going to bring that up there and do another straight stitch. And I'm just using up the thread because I don't like having lots of little loose pieces of thread. Okay. And so by using those, a couple of straight stitches mixed in with the feather stitch, it just made that a bit more interesting of a plant. So I'm just going to tie this off at the back. And then there's just a little bit to toss, not so bad. And I'm going to continue showing you what I would do. So say if I'm making this into a larger plant, I'll do one more stalk or one more branch like that. So I'm taking 2 strands again. Fingers crossed I can get this threaded. Let's see. Not bad. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to tie this off. So I'm making another stalk, and I'm just going to come over a little bit. And let's do it again. This time I'm not going to draw a line. Okay. And I'll show you what I mean about just freehanding it. So I'm holding it with my thumb. I'm going to go in and out of the fabric with the amount of space in that stitch that you want to see in your V. Okay, so I'll go to the left-hand side now, and I'm going to go in and back out. And I'm always kind of controlling it with my thumb. Now, because I don't have a hoop, I want to make sure I'm not over tightening. And that's also the reason why I'm often using my thumb just to flatten it out, because I generally frame these landscapes and I want them to be perfectly flat after. They look a little bit like paintings. So I don't want a whole bunch of puckering in the areas where I'm doing the stitching. And if you pull too tight, you're going to find right away that you've got puckers. So by the time you get to the bottom again, actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this over right towards that first one. And then it looks like it's coming out of the same plant. That looks cool. And then I'm going to work my way back up this stem a little bit with my remaining red. And I'll just tack on a few extra branches. The thing with a feather stitch is you have to always work from the top to the bottom. So it's often necessary to use a few straight stitches to just get back up to the top. So I still have quite a bit of thread. And what I've decided I want to do is I'm going to tuck over to the left side of this plant. This is literally exactly how I do it in my landscapes. I just sort of eyeball it. And I'm going to come on over and I'm going to start another feather stitch right here. Ooh, I don't have very much left, but anyways, let's see how far down we can go. So I'm going to do another V like this. I'm going to keep going. And then once you get to the point where you think you're running out of thread, then I'm just going to tie back in to one of those existing stitches. How cool is that? So it's like a little plant. So then now I'm going to tie this off. I always put knots in the back. There's a few ways that you can avoid that. Like if you're trying to add it to something that already has a backing on it and you don't want to see the knots, but that's for another video. So that's a feather stitch. Now, I just want to show you a couple examples of if I'm doing a landscape. I'm going to take a lighter color this time. If I was adding this to one of my landscapes, what I would generally do is I never use just one color. Say if I'm making a plant like that, I will always use a couple colors on top of one another. I'm just going to pull out my two strands here. Oh, they might be getting stuck. No. And so that's when you really start to be able to build some texture and do something interesting with your feather stitch is take a second color. So this is the 3052 and the original green was the 3051. So it's just two different colors of green. But I'll show you once I have the base done. I usually do the base in the darker color. Then you can come up right over top of those stitches with a lighter color. And I'm going to keep, it's still the feather stitch. It's still literally exactly the same. And it just builds a little more depth to that plant. And you're kind of covering up some of the stitches you've got already. Don't let that bother you. You want it to. You want to cover over stitches that you have already done. And it's in the layering of those stitches and having some tuck in behind others that you're going to get a really just sort of interesting three-dimensional plant. So there's one row. That was, see how quick that was? So now I'm going to just sort of tuck back. I'm going to move back up using my straight stitches to the top of this other portion of the plant. I don't like having really long loose threads at the back of my pieces, so I often just use the straight stitches to get to where I want to go. Or you could also tie it off and start fresh. I'm just going to do another layer of this lighter color over top of this. There, it's starting to look so good. And that takes all of a few minutes, really. Now, admittedly, I am a pretty quick stitcher at this point, but feather stitch is a fast stitch. And that's probably one of the things I like the most about it, is that it's fast and it looks very effective. Like when you're, especially if you're somebody who likes to do natural elements on their work. And if you're somebody who likes to embroider flowers, that is a wonderful stitch to learn. So I'm just going to show you, because I pulled them closer here, some of the ones that I've done in my pieces. So this is a piece that's already bound, so you can't, there's no stitching on the back. I quilted it after, but there is a feather stitch bush. So that's layers and layers of feather stitch that I've just made them all come down to the same point. So that's one example of where I've used feather stitch. And the other one that I wanted to pull over here to show you is this tree, this sort of weeping willow tree. These branches are feather stitch, but if you look closely, I'm going to see if I can move this closer and see if you can see that. The feather stitch goes from the ends of the branches up. So when I stitch that, I'm not going from top to bottom, I'm going from the ends of the branches in. So it's just another way of using feather stitch. Actually, you can see it in the plant here as well. So lots of ways to use the feather stitch. You can use it in branches, you can use it in plants, and I just really think that that is a stitch that if you're somebody who is getting into embroidery, it's definitely one of the best stitches to learn. Well, thanks for watching me stitch. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you'll use the feather stitch in some of your work. If you haven't watched it already, I encourage you to look at my video. It's a longer video with my top 10 stitches for beginners. And if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can always head to my website at juliegarcia.com. I will leave all of the information below this video. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.